Welcome to today's Explainer. As a history professor, I get asked a lot of wild questions. But here's one of my absolute favorites. How on earth does a hyper-local village lottery system actually build a massive transoceanic maritime empire? Well, today we're looking at the Chola Dynasty of South India to figure exactly that out. We're going to see how they pulled off this incredibly delicate balancing act, keeping true democratic village autonomy alive while somehow fueling an absolute juggernaut of a centralized military. Let's get into it. So looking at the imperial Cholas between the 9th and 13th centuries, they didn't just conquer territories, right? They built a sophisticated state machine that totally dominated South and Southeast Asia. Honestly, their administrative engineering is a masterclass. It's so precise, historians are still obsessed with dissecting it today. For this explainer, we've broken it down into 6 parts. The Chola administrative machine, village democracy at Uttaramerur, taxation funding the military, securing the Bay of Bengal, temples projecting royal authority, and lastly, the imperial Chola legacy. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the Chola administrative machine. To run an empire this big, you need a highly structured pyramid, and the Cholas had this down to a science. At the very top, the empire was sliced into 9 major provinces called mandalams. These were usually run by viceroys, who, big surprise, were often close relatives of the king. From the mandalams, power trickled down into districts known as valanadus, then into smaller nadus, all the way down to the kurams or ors, the local villages. This multi-tiered setup was pure genius. It meant imperial orders could reach the absolute fringes of the kingdom, but everyday local stuff, that was handled by the folks actually living there. Which brings us right to part 2, village democracy at Uttaramerur. Okay, so how did they actually manage those local affairs? Well, villages like Uttaramerur used something called the Kudavalai system. It was basically a sophisticated, rule-based lottery to elect their governing committees, or variums. Picture this. Eligible names are written down on palm leaf tickets and tossed into a pot. They get a good shuffle, and then a young boy randomly draws the tickets out while priests read the names aloud. The folks selected would then serve a 360-day term on specific committees, managing things like the local tank or the village gardens. But hold on, this wasn't just some free-for-all where anyone could get picked. The inscriptions we have show some insanely strict qualifications just to get your name in that pot. You had to own at least 1/4 veli of tax-paying land, which is roughly an acre and a half. You had to actually live in a house on that land, be between 35 and 70 years old, and really know your Vedic text. And the disqualifications? Brutal. If you failed to submit your accounts from a previous term, out. Committed any great sins like theft or hung out with criminals, disqualified. You could literally be banned from running just for eating forbidden food. And their approach to accountability is just fascinating. If a committee member was caught up in corruption or forgery, they weren't just quietly fired. No, they were immediately removed and faced the wonderfully humiliating punishment of being paraded around the village on a donkey. It really shows a system built entirely on deep local trust, strict rules, and absolute transparency. Let's move on to part 3, taxation funding the military. Now, those hyper-efficient local assemblies didn't just govern, they were responsible for collecting a highly structured set of taxes. The state actually ran these meticulous land surveys, grading the soil based on fertility, and then assessed the kadamai, which was the primary land tax. But they didn't stop there. They levied professional tolls on weavers and merchants and collected specific local taxes, like the irium, which was strictly ring-fenced for maintaining the village irrigation tanks. It's a brilliant pipeline funneling local wealth right up to the crown. Because the land in areas like the Kaveri River Delta was just so incredibly well surveyed and irrigated, the agricultural yields were off the charts. The state typically took about 1/6 of the land's yield. Sometimes they take it in kind, like paddy, or sometimes in gold coins. This gave the Chola kings an incredibly massive, and more importantly, reliable stream of revenue. So, what do you buy when you have all that centralized wealth? A military machine unlike any other. This revenue funded a standing army of 70 regiments, an elite royal guard, and get this, a staggering 60,000 war elephants. I mean, that is power projection on a truly unimaginable scale. And they definitely used that power. Here's part 4, securing the Bay of Bengal. The Chola fleet is basically the absolute peak of ancient Indian maritime capacity. Back in 1025 CE, the Srivijaya Empire, over in modern-day Indonesia and Malaysia, was enforcing this super restrictive trade monopoly. And this was severely cutting into the Cholas' highly profitable trade with Song China. So, what does King Rajendra Chola I do? He launches an audacious, deep-sea naval expedition. Instead of just creeping along the coastline, his fleet sailed directly across the Indian Ocean in a massive surprise attack. They sacked the Srivijayan capital of Palembang and totally neutralized 12 other regional ports. Now, this rapid, devastating campaign wasn't about permanently conquering the territory, but it completely rewrote the geopolitical map. By taking control of those strategic coastal ports and crushing local piracy, the Cholas essentially turned the entire Bay of Bengal into a Chola lake. This whole naval flex was specifically designed to protect their elite, autonomous merchant guilds, like the famous Ayavole 500. With the sea lanes secured, those guilds could completely dominate the global maritime trade routes, linking China, India, and the Arab world. All of this brings us to part 5, temples projecting royal authority. With all that wealth pouring in, the Chola kings built monumental temples, but not just for worship. These structures were the literal beating heart of their society. Yes, they were spiritual centers for education, dance, and music, but at the same time, they acted as massive economic banks. The temples received huge endowments of tax-exempt land, and then they turn around and reinvest that wealth by offering loans back to the agricultural settlements. Plus, just looking at their towering presence physically reinforced the semi-divine, untouchable authority of the emperors. There is no better example of this than the breathtaking Brihadiswar Temple in Tanjavur, commissioned by King Rajaraja I around 1010 CE. This thing has a massive 216-foot high tower built with interlocking granite stones and absolutely no mortar. The sheer logistics of hauling that granite from distant quarries and managing the immense skilled workforce needed to build it, that requires a state that is tightly integrated and phenomenally wealthy. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site today and an incredible physical testament to their organizational genius. Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, the Imperial Chola Legacy. We've seen how the Cholas managed this impossible balancing act, harmonizing massive, centralized military might with incredibly strict, rule-based local democracies. When you look back at the palm leaf tickets from Uttaramerur, the absolute dominance of the Chola navy, and the towering granite of the Brihadiswara temple, it really leaves you with a provocative question. As we navigate our own messy complexities of governance today, what can our modern democracies learn from this 1,000-year-old system? Could striking a better balance between hyperlocal autonomy and centralized power actually be the key to lasting stability? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.